My dad and I stayed at the old cabin a few years back. A super rustic shack in the middle of the eerie wilderness of Idaho, where the silence was deafening. The nearest town was miles away, and the only road nearby was an old logging road that was barely passable. Years later, I decided to relive the experience with my pal called Alex. Alex has always been a very paranoid person, and even the slightest things will make him jump out of his hoops. It was a fun idea to bring him to this vacation place of mine, as he would be a good entertainer for me. As we were driving, I told Alex about the mysteries that rumors had mentioned about a certain place nearby the cabin that was abandoned for years and had a deep dark secret behind its locked doors. The locals that used to live there mentioned that the cabin was cursed and that terrible things happened to anyone who went near it. They said that there was a spot in the cabin that was particularly dangerous and that anyone who entered that area never came back. I was quite fixated on exploring the place, thinking what mysteries could unfold. The abandoned house was not too far away from our cabin spot. They said the house was just up on the hill and you could spot it easily from your window. Without much thought, I said, why don't we explore it? Alex was quite hesitant on agreeing to this, but I managed to convince him that it would be a fun adventure. We shall depart to the place during the nighttime, thinking it could give off a wild experience for us. Reaching back to our cabin spot, we unpacked our bags and headed inside to wash ourselves up after the long drive. It was around 4 p.m. We built a campfire right outside of our cabin and grabbed a few beers and played some cards to pass the time. Eventually, the night has arrived. We packed our things and started off on adventure to the abandoned place. I have a power LED flashlight, and so did my friends. As we reached the abandoned place, the cabin was old and decrepit, with broken windows and a sagging roof. The front door was barely attached to its hinges, and it creaked loudly as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale and musty, with a thick layer of dust covering everything. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt a sense of foreboding. We cautiously made our way through the rooms, avoiding the spot that the locals had warned us about. But as we were about to leave, I noticed a strange symbol etched into the wall. It looked like a twisted pentagram, and it sent a shiver down my spine. That's when we heard it. The sound of chanting coming from outside the cabin. We froze, unsure of what to do. But as the chanting grew louder, we knew we had to get out of there. We bolted towards the door, but as we emerged into the darkness, we were met with a terrifying sight. A group of people dressed in black robes were standing in a circle, and in the center of the circle was a man holding a sacrificial knife. At a sudden moment our eyes met. They were staring at us blankly with a pause of 15 seconds without any movements. We quickly ran out at full speed, but it seemed like they were following us. We could hear their footsteps closing in, and their voices grew louder as they chanted in some unknown language. It felt like the forest was alive with their presence. We stumbled through the darkness, trying to find our way back to the safety of our cabin. It felt like an eternity, but finally, we saw the dim light of our campfire in the distance. We ran towards it with all our might, and as we reached the cabin, we slammed the door shut behind us, panting and sweating. As we caught our breath, we could hear the chanting growing fainter in the distance. We looked at each other, both of us terrified and unsure of what had just happened. We knew that we had stumbled onto something dark and dangerous, and that we were lucky to have escaped with our lives. Never again we will ever explore such a frightening place. My name is Daryl, and I was born in California. As a kid, my buddies and I used to hang out at the graveyard area. It was peaceful, since there weren't any wildlife around, and it felt like our own little oasis where no one else would be. We used to play hide and seek, and there were so many hiding spots that we had explored every part of the cemetery. There was a huge churchyard with many rooms, but there was one room in particular that was always locked, and we never knew why. As adults, my friends and I decided to go back to the graveyard at night to relive old memories. We drove my friend's old beat-up car 30 kilometers away to get there. When we arrived, we saw a figure sitting on a rock on the other side of a pond. The figure was all black and wore an old-style top hat. We stared at him for a moment, but he didn't acknowledge us, so we went into the graveyard to reminisce. As we talked, we remembered the locked room and became curious about what was inside. We tried knocking, but there was no answer. It was a deserted place, so we tried breaking the door handle with a metal bar. As we slowly opened the door, the room was pitch black, so we turned on our phone flashlights. What we found next was something that we were not prepared for. Corpses were all around the room. Some were on the floor, and some were hanging on hooks. It was something that you'd see on the dark web, called the Red Room. There were medieval torture tools in the room covered in human blood, like the rat torture, breaking wheel, and Iron Maiden. We were shocked and chilled to the bone, wondering if the dark figure we saw as kids had been living there all along. Suddenly, we heard a loud thump coming from the top floor. And then we saw it. A 7-foot-tall bearded man covered in corpses, wearing them like a shirt, with a putrid smell that made us gag. He was really angry and came running at us. We quickly got into our car and drove off, never looking back. Now, every time I think about that night, I can't help but shiver. The memories of that locked room and the Red Room are forever etched in my mind, and I never want to go back to that place again. I was around 18 years old when the tragedy struck. I used to live in rural areas right next to the ocean, and this happened in north of Germany. I was once told by my dad that the ocean represented a greater unknown of the fear that many things are undiscovered. My dad used to tell me stories about the ocean, and he was a fisherman after all, so I knew that he had encountered many things on sea. I've been on boating trips with my dad back then and gotten a grasp of experience handling the boat since we grew up around boats and the sea. It was the beginning of university break. So, me and my best friend Daniel decided to head out for a boat trip during the weekend. We had planned this a long time ago, but didn't have the time for it. We were super excited for this. We hurried to pack our bags, which include torchlight, binoculars, and a container with food and drinks in it. As we loaded our bags into our motor-powered boats, which I believe was a bowrider boat, it was one of my dad's old boat. He was okay lending it to me, and so we began drifting off to sea. On our way forward, about 20 kilometers away from land, we noticed the riffs had begun splashing vigorously, but weren't too concerned about it at all. Daniel shrieked and asked, "Does it seem odd all of a sudden the waves are coming in like this?" I looked at the waves, and they did seem bigger than usual. I replied, "Maybe it's just the tide changing. Let's keep going and see." So, we continued on our journey, but soon enough, the waves grew even larger and started rocking the boat. It became harder to control and navigate as the boat was getting tossed around. We realized we were in the middle of a storm. A moment later, there was a sudden bang sound coming from below our boat. Immediately, I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the direction of the sound. It was pitch black outside, and the storm was making it impossible to see anything clearly. I tried to focus really hard and turn on my flashlight at the highest beam. As the light shone into the darkness, I saw something that made my blood run cold. What I saw was a dark silhouette with an enormous size, about 12 feet in length. Its head was replaced by its giant gaping maw with rows upon rows of jagged sharp teeth. It had a captivating sense of dread that draws you in to be devoured. 2 tendrils protrude out of its jaw, the length longer than 2 buses combined. One look was all I needed to know that I shouldn't be here to find out what it was for. I could tell the thing had stared at me dead in the eyes, with all bloody red, filled with anger. I had cold sweat pouring down, and I was quite in a petrified state. Daniel on the other side trembled with fear, not knowing what the heck I was looking at. Without much hesitation, I quickly started the motor engine and put it on full thrust back to shore. As I turned behind and looked, the thing had disappeared. We felt immediate relief. We made it back safely, but the memory of that night has haunted me ever since. I can't help but wonder what that creature was, and whether there are more of them lurking beneath the surface, waiting to drag their next victim into the depths of the ocean.